apologies. We have one, Councillor Williams. Any other apologies? No, I move that apology. Seconded, Councillor Atkinson. All those in favour that we accept Councillor Williams' apologies, say aye. Against, declare it carried. Item 2, conflicts of interest. Any 2 minute? No. All right, we move on to item 3, which is the confirmation of minutes from our February the 13th meeting, which is pages 5 to 9 in your agenda. Thank you, Councillor. A seconder, Councillor Blackie. Any alterations or anything? I noticed that we've got a heath board on page 3 of 5 instead of a health board, but apart from that,
just to make sure that
yeah. All right, I'll put those minutes. All those in favour that the minutes of February the 13th are a true and accurate record of that meeting, please say aye. Against, declare it carried. Item 4, matters arising. Now, I was is that going to be there's an item? Oh, is there an item in the zone program? Item 6.2. The zone program's got what we were going with that. So we'll wait till then. Any other matters arising? I've got one here about we talked about going out to have a look at the Burgess Stream project, and I just raise it. It got funding on Monday from the zone committee through immediate steps. So at some point, can someone note that it would probably be this committee is keen to go and have a look, and I think it probably would be good to extend that invite to the zone committee members who might like to attend as well. It may be that it's not till October or something, so that'll be good. Any other matters arising? No. Okay. Thank you. And so we move to item 5, which is deputations, and invite Andrew Arps from ECAN to take us through whatever he's going to take us through. Thank you, Andrew.
There's a presentation behind you, son.
Okay. Kia ora all. Direct that a bit. Okay, so yes, an update on, I'll call it COVID and all things around COVID funding, the degree of understanding that we have. There's just really 3 slides today. The first one, sort of looking at it in the big picture, bringing it to what environment category down, and then bring it down into the waimakariri level. So that list there is a list of the various funds that are available at the moment from central government. Our main focus is on that second one down, the regional environmental projects, and what's have to say also we've been doing some work with Billion Trees and the provincial growth fund. So those are the 3 that I'll cover off. Now, the regional sector was actually asked by central government to respond, and for that matter to do so at pace. It's about 48 hours to bring together a whole program of work. We've been through 2 rounds of that, the second one sort of qualifying and providing a little bit more information. Tront has been involved in that, and then we've also, of course, drawn on the knowledge that we have of what was actually going on in the zones and possible projects in terms of bringing in the various programs that we would apply for funds for. We're expecting answers back, by the way, on this probably within the next week or 2, as we progress through. So when we've looked at it, the program that we put forward is we're looking at a total of $72 million over 5 years. The ones highlighted in green are the ones that in particular affect waimakariri. So the planting and regeneration program. I'm just going to stop before I talk too much about that aspect and jump into another working group that's actually occurring within Environment Canterbury at the moment, which currently is made up of councillors and staff, but will be expanded to include other stakeholders. And that's around a work program for a regional planting and regeneration program. The working title is called Red and Black and Green. And we're looking at all things to do with what would it take to really upscale a planting and regeneration program. So when I say planting and regeneration, that's everything from the obvious planting, but right through to protection and everything sort of in between. And what focus would that particular program have, whether it be, for example, lowland streams, or would it be broader than that? So those things are sort of being worked through at the moment. And when that gets to a stage where there's at least a framework around it, that's when we'll start sharing with stakeholders, of which obviously the district councils are part of that. The regional planting program there that we put up, effectively that would put that red and black and green program on steroids. That's talking about, for that particular one, we're looking at $7 million per annum. Now, to put that in perspective, that's when we look at the work we've done under the likes of immediate steps programs in the planting and regeneration space. So this is excluding things like braided rivers and all of that. It's basically saying we're going to do the same every year as what we've done for the last 10 years, for the next 5 years. So that's for the next 5 years to really upscale things. The planting program, and I'm jumping around a bit here, the red and black and green planting program, that's being looked at as a sort of 15 to 20 year program, a little bit like the Taranaki one. So there's these two streams of complementary work going on, but the attraction of this one is obviously that that's got a very large pot of money with it. Braided River Revival Program. Braided River Revival is a program which is led by the values of Mahinga Kai, recreation and conservation. And if you like, it's a non-statutory program, but we are expanding it to look at river works and everything like that. So that work there, in the case of this, the Ashley Rakahuri has already been identified as the first of the braided rivers that we're putting this project, wrapping it around. And there's quite a bit of work already being identified for that. That would extend to the likes of the Waimakariri and other braided rivers. It would just simply allow us to do the work that we want and needs to be done a whole lot faster. The next one down in the green is around the regional parks and looking at expanding those, and there's a few other spots around where regional parks could be created. Some of that's actually quite, shall we say, straightforward work in terms of making better areas, but it's also about creating things like a whitewater park that happens to be in the Selwyn side of the Waimakariri, but we are looking at other opportunities too, so that they the likes of the Waimakariri Regional Park and the Ashley Rakahuri Regional Park, which by default also doubles up in the Braided River Revival, those two, that they get enhanced further. And then another one is around regional catchment management. So we absolutely understand that this catchment management and catchment groups needs to be led from the ground up, but we want to be in a position to really support these groups. And we're saying, well, let's identify 12 and actually start working with them and help, whether it be with funding or other mechanisms that we can provide to them, help them be successful. But obviously our role in that often is at least the third or fourth seat back in the bus. It's not driving the bus of that one. There's a couple of things there where we have been successful at of late is Next Generation Farmers. They've just been awarded a sum of funds for the next 3 years. So that's from an initiative we've been working with them on. And also for that matter, Hiranui Dryland Land Care Group, they too are progressing quite well. It's looking like they'll get a significant amount of funds. So, yeah. Yes. Oh. And then, okay. So one thing to be very clear is that these funding from the COVID schemes and similar, they definitely will come with conditions. Obviously, those conditions, the one that's going to be in there big time will be around employment. Some of the funds have actually spelt it out. This means do not use volunteers. It's about creating jobs. And all the projects that you folks have got on the go, got a list that was provided to me of the when we've discussed around the green spaces list, and a recent list that Sophie had circulated around opportunities in the coastal area. That's definitely in the mix, but nothing's guaranteed for funding because we simply are. This is all working at pace. Some of the information is a bit grey, but we're starting to forge ahead, but we are feeling pretty confident that funding will come through in one form or another. We have been working with DOC, and then as I've just said there, as things get a little bit clearer with funds, then we can progress further with stakeholders, including the Runanga. And obviously the tight team of Environment Canterbury and the District Council will work together on that. And to a degree there, down the bottom, I've got hold on for the ride. If these funds come through, it is a lot of money. It's way beyond what we've been doing in the past. So it kind of has its exciting element to it, but it also has its scary part to it in terms of making it work and doing it in a coordinated approach. And we are very aware that it cannot be achieved with just Environment Canterbury doing it. We'll be spreading that network and making sure that things are leveraged and delivered well. Any questions?
Andrew, just in terms of what's happening behind the scenes, what's happening with working with agencies so that you know this is backed up, i.e. social enterprises or employment agencies, all of those people? What do we know that's out there, or what do we not know, so that if this does hit the ground, what's happening in that space?
Right now, we don't. There may be others at Environment Canterbury that know, but ours, the role I've been playing has been more about identifying the projects and bringing them together. I know that had been. We can perhaps get some feedback to you on that, but I definitely see there may be a role where we look at some of these projects, and I don't know of all of that's happened in waimakariri, but I think of the folk at Bunnings, and connecting those two quite quickly would be beneficial. But yeah, or maybe what I would say, Neville, is we can certainly, that's the top priority within the program, is the employment of people. So we can take that one, because I think it's a good example where we know there's a pool of people and we know there's jobs. That maybe that's the one that we try and see, how do we work that through to securely join the dots. Yeah. So definitely bear that in mind. Yeah. Oh.
Realistically, looking at the fundings available, how much time does that allow for employment in terms of a time frame? Have you looked at any of that? Is it a 1-year program or a 2-year program?
Some of the projects we're talking about are definitely, they range from let's get underway within 2 months, right through to, and the funding goes out for the COVID funding goes out for 5 years. We are hoping that programs like the Red and Black and Green, that gets the whole thing going, and then going beyond that. That includes, we're obviously looking at, in that instance, looking at the supply of stock as well, as always for planting programs is an issue. And some of them in the space of the Provincial Growth Fund, they want things underway within a matter of weeks. Yeah, so we've got to, and those, part of that doesn't necessarily mean people working, but it's the plans and things in place. So that's when they say shovel ready. We've got a good idea and a concept, but I just very briefly talking to Sophie before, the coastal stuff she talked about, it's worth should we say, working it up a little bit. So you've actually got at least something to sell to them, and probably sell that as a cluster of work, a number of wetlands down there.
You mentioned sourcing the plants for the planting. Have you actually spoken to any suppliers about possible needs going forward if you're successful?
We have, but we've actually taken a step back from that first. Sandra, you may recall that Jason Butt did some work around, effectively it's eco-sourcing, but about the different plants to be being planted in the different areas of waimakariri. And then also you've got the various situations, so whether it be wetland, lowland, stream, etc. So that sort of matrix. So we're making up, we're working, or refreshing our lists of saying these are the right plants for waimakariri. And at the moment, we're actually going through a list, excuse me, to go, right, here's a core range of plants that might add up to 100 different varieties. Here's a core range of 20 or 15 that'll make up the bulk of it, given where the most of the work will do. So we're getting that clear before we go to the nurseries. That said, the council has, I've identified some funding in this year to go towards just initiating the audit, because a big part of this is about, and the role that perhaps Environment Canterbury can play is enabling the industry to actually, and a lot of that's actually about providing funds so they can do their work, seed collection, like that. And then for next year, the council has put forward, I think it's about 250,000 for this project. That's less than perhaps we wanted, but it's a start. But they're more looking towards the long-term plan. But again, if the COVID funding comes along, then that's finances should actually be a non-issue. It'll be how quickly we can get production underway. Really, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, we have spoken to them informally, but we can't say anything until we've actually. There's just a few things we just need to get. So yeah, informal discussions. Yeah.
Is there any areas that are identified in any of these projects that don't actually need remnant plants that you can actually source from elsewhere?
Some of the projects will in fact just be fencing projects for regeneration, and they can still, so the fencing is the labour, and that's where the jobs are. So there's some of those. There is stock available now, so it's a bit of a mix. And part of what we're looking at is the projects going, actually, given that I think people now understand that planting is at least a 3-year program for any significant site, and so we would look more to, if plants aren't available, we would more looking at the first year will be site preparation and fencing and all that, and getting everything ready for the second year of planting. But I haven't answered you, sorry.
The question I'm asking is, are there any of the sites that don't need remnant planting? Because surely not every site or every piece of ground has to have a remnant plant on it. We must be able to plant new plants, different plants, English plants, whatever, in some areas for some purposes.
Okay. When it comes to Environment Canterbury, up until now, it's been about Indigenous biodiversity. Exotics is being considered as part of red and black and green as part of the mix in order to get, shall we say, the buy-in to the wider community, because initially discussion has been about, I'll work with the willing, but the willing is a selective group, and I don't want to put too much of a tight piece around it. Part of the program is actually about extending the participation to actually bring more people into it. In order to do that, sometimes you start to make a bit of a mix. Some of it in North Canterbury has been around using poplar and willow, but that's also to do with soil erosion work up there as well. Okay. Yep, thank you. It does. Yep, and we will definitely, we won't bother wait, we'll come through Chris or whoever, just let you know as soon as we hear things. Okay, thank you. Cheers.
We're back on. Right, we'll move on now to the reports and item 6.1, which is Arahati Te Awa Working Group Terms of Reference, and invite Grant and Kate to take us through this. Over to you. Pages 10 to 25. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Sandra. Good morning, everybody. So the report is to run through the terms of reference and also the setting up of a working group which would look at what the actual work plan and action plan would be to come out of that. So the report that's in front of you, you'll see there that it's actually proposing a mix of who would be approved for the group. So you'll see there that we've got the biodiversity portfolio holder, Councillor Stewart on there, and then there's a mix of staff and also another elected member appointee that is being requested. So we're asking that the Land and Waterway Committee makes a nomination for who that might be so that we can appoint someone to that group. The terms of reference you will see in the appendix there, it's set out the purpose of what the group's about, the quorum, and also some of the objectives which were taken from the original report that came through late last year. And it's kind of formalised what that would be. The idea would be that the working group then sends back a work plan to the Land and Waterway Committee so that they can understand exactly what it is that that looks like, and there can be some recommendations made around that as well. It's worth noting that obviously within the annual plan there was an application for 100,000 for the first year of the project, which is looking primarily to implement some work around the CAM. Kate's been doing some great work there, especially around mapping and also getting an understanding for what it is that we could actually do within that space, as well as more recently been working on some cross sections as well, so that we could have a bit of a look about what it might look like, so that we can bring that back to the group as well and actually sort of show, hey, this is actually what it looks like on the ground. This is how it could work. Some of the things that we need to do as well around maybe easements and other land tenure discussions that we might need to have just to help create that continual flow through there as well. So that's the report in a nutshell. I'm very happy to take any questions on that as well.
Grant, is there any reason why this group can't be this committee and keep the quorum the same, but they have this committee? Because I know the chair and I talked about another couple of members that we think are probably necessary under the directive here. But is there any reason why it can't be this committee with the same quorum that could have the meetings before and after the meeting, or to feed into this committee? Because I mean, it's actually the basis of getting this committee to work. The information delivered to the committee straight away, in my view, is something that they need to be participating in. So that's my question. Is there any reason why it couldn't be this committee with?
I just wonder whether
I'm sorry.
Probably better for me to answer it than Grant, but I think that's really your decision. And the purpose of this working group doesn't really have any delegated authority. It's more a group of doers. So you'll see it's predominantly staff rather than elected members, and it reports back into this committee for decisions. So if it was to, look, of course that's an option for you, but the caution I would have is that's not necessarily the best forum for just getting us, effectively getting staff to report to some kind of a project control structure that's a reasonably limited number of people, where we can meet on a more ad hoc basis and give a bit more day-to-day direction, I suppose. It's not a day-to-day group, but it's something that's not quite the full governance structure that this committee is. And I suppose I would have, if you were to say, why can't this committee do it, then one option is you don't even have this working group, you just have them reporting directly to the committee.
Misunderstood my question, really. The structure's fine, but instead of the one person, they actually have all members of this committee appointed to it. Now, I mean, if people don't choose to turn up to that, that's their issue. What I'm saying is that you would, I would think generally, I mean, I just get round the table, people gesturing to each other, everybody wants to be on it for a start. And I'm just, what I'm saying is that your structure here is fine. I've got, take no issue with your structure. It's about everybody working together to get the means that you want to get to.
Okay, that sounds a little bit more like the Solid and Hazardous Waste Working Party, which actually I know there's a lot of active interest from elected members, and that works really well. So it's a good, slightly less formal grouping. So if you were to, you know, as I said, it's up to you, and that would be fine.
Is there any reason why we couldn't just leave it as this and yet just invite all members of the committee to attend if they wish? Would that not be the easier way of managing the group, so that you've got a core decision-making group that the other members can contribute as with speaking rights, perhaps?
Is well, two questions. What are people's view about the sort of structure that Councillor Atkinson's talked about? Plus, I've had an approach from Chair of Runanga, Arapata Reuben, and Chair of Water Zone, Mike Blackwell, who are interested in being part of this working group, because you may be aware that some of the Water Zone catchment groups are sort of, well, they're talking about it. But particularly if we go to the CAM here, there's a real interest and lots of expertise in those two people. And I, for one, are really keen that they are part of this working group. So there's that on the table as well. So.
Yes, yep, I do. If Sandra, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Certainly wasn't the intention to have external parties as a member of this. This is really a staff, the purpose of this is really a staff working group to try and make sure we've got some structure around just managing the staff people involved in feeding this committee and acting on decisions of this committee. So I wouldn't recommend that you invite others to attend this group. We'll certainly work with those other groups and at a staff level, but we should remember we do have the Water Zone Committee as well, and which we're a member of, that includes a sort of a wider group. And I know we had a little bit of this discussion even when the Land and Water Committee was being set up, and around the water zone there was quite a lot of interest in it, and we almost had to say thank you for your interest, but this is a council committee. And I think again that's the question that is probably being tested here. I think we've got a lot of ways. We've got, like in terms of the Runanga, we've got the Runanga meetings. We've also got the Mahi Tahi committee. We've got a lot of regular staff interaction between council staff and Environment Canterbury. And I think if we start to bring in too many moving parts into this group, it loses its ability to function effectively as a staff working group.
I was just going to say, could we not just engage with those external parties as needs be to make use of their expertise and their input without having them be a formal part of the committee, of the steering group?
Yes. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes. Well, that's certainly an option. I'm not envisaging Runanga rep. I'm envisaging the chair and the two chairs, because they have particular expertise in some of the projects here. So that's the difference. I'm not proposing opening it to a Runanga rep or a water zone members.
I'm really sorry. I'm trying to remember which question it was. It was a couple of questions ago. It was effective just so the question was, just refresh my memory, Councillor Barney. Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes, yeah, that's certainly the intention that we will do that. And we already have got, I believe, governance structures in place for that to happen at a more formal level. But absolutely, that is the intention.
I absolutely recognize that there is a huge amount of expertise to be tapped into there, particularly with Mahinga Kai and just knowledge of the Cam River. So yeah, that would be an excellent outcome if we could make use of that while we traverse through this project.
I'm in your hands about how you want to proceed here. There on the table is one other elected member, and if you want to go that way. Yep. Yes.
Thank you. Everything in the motion that is, but just change the one other elected member to Councillor Mealings and add a note under D that notes that all members of the Land and Water Committee will be invited to attend the meetings and have speaking rights, and then move the subsequent ones down F, G and H.
I just ask from do we need the note, given that it's a public meeting and members of the committee can attend at any time anyway? Do we need a note?
Just speaking to it very quickly, I take in everyone's point that we all are very, very keen on this project and we'd all love to be involved, and I certainly know the community boards are also very, very keen to have some input into this project. It's a very important one for our district. I think this is just to start the process. It's the strategy part of it. So really it just needs to be a small group who can get the strategy started, and then that will diverge into individual projects, which is then when we need all the expertise in the district. So just to get this moving, I think it's really good to have the 5 people appointed. I suggested Councillor Mealings because of her connection with sustainability and her other portfolios. I felt that would be an appropriate person to be on there, as well as Councillor Stewart. And I'm very, very hopeful that the staff could move this forward and bring us back some information on how we can get this moving as quick as possible. One question I did want to ask staff is if there's any way we can apply for funding for this project through the COVID-19 emergency job scheme. If that's something they could look into very, very quickly, would be very, very helpful for us, because obviously funding is going to be an ongoing battle with trying to keep the rates down. So I'm happy to support the motion that's been put forward, and I hope the committee will support it.
Yeah, and look, it's quite timely that we had Andrew here as well. So a few weeks ago, we've actually been doing a lot of work with Kate, Sophie, and through Chris as well to get forward some information to ECAN about the fund that they've been talking about here. One of the ones that we detailed quite a lot to them was this project, so that they could actually understand, which they've picked up as well, as to how important it is for us in the district as well. So it's very much in the mix there for whatever comes out of the ECAN process.
You I can put the have we got another question? Sorry. Yes, Councillor.
The amendment being H, that the chair of the Water Zone Committee and the chair of the Runanga, as it so happens, is the chair, also become members of this committee. The reason I've added this in is the fact that at every point we get asked by the Runanga, in fact we don't get asked at the hui, we get told that they are partners of ours and that they wish to be in on the ground floor of when we are developing these sorts of projects, policies, all of those sorts of things. Now, we do have the Mahi Tahi Committee, and that's all good, that the governance side of that will come through. But we're talking about a doing party in the words of Mr. Cleary. So they have asked many times to be on the doing parties before we get to the governance making parties, if you like, where we need to go. And I think that it's absolutely important that that they are there on the ground floor of this particular project. I wouldn't recommend what I'm recommending to a whole lot of other working parties, but this particular one where we're talking about land and water is absolutely goes to the heart and the root of the Runanga and what it is that they're trying to get through local government and what they're trying to get through government itself. So I think that it's absolutely necessary, if indeed, and that's why I use part of, if indeed they decline that, then that is fine, you know, but I think we need to give the opportunity to them to belong to this at ground roots and right on the floor and at the beginning.
Thank you, Councillor, and I take up my opportunity to talk to it as well. I would agree. I've had approaches from Arapata right at the beginning about involvement, and particularly on the doing and the getting funding side as well. I mean, I've got a couple of emails here about he wants to apply for various funds. I would like to see that the Runanga chair is involved from the outset, and I think it is very important that the water zone chair is also involved. We need to spread the word and get community buy-in and publicity for this. And I see that the Runanga is just at the grassroots involvement needs to be on board here without going, as Councillor Atkinson said, it is a separate step. It is a separate step to water zone. It is a separate step to Mahi Tahi or the Runanga monthly meeting that you have. This just brings everybody in right at the foundation of it, so that they can go away and use their networks and bring in, to me, it concentrates and focuses right at the grass level. And I'm really keen that, in fact, there is an invitation out to those two people. I'm making the difference here, and I see council, and that's why I seconded it, that in fact we are talking about two particular people who have particular expertise and involvement here for the projects that we've already talking about. So I'm really keen that if you don't want them on a working group, that they come in, and I can understand that view, but that they are involved right at the start. Now, I'm quite happy that if this doesn't work within 12 months, that we have a review of it and just see whether it has focused and got us moving in the way I would expect it would have. So very happy to support that addition. Councillor Blackie.
I'll support the amendment. The only downside I see is that, as Jared has said, it's a staff working committee. Bringing outsiders in like that is going to run immediately into timetabling problems, I'd imagine. But basically, that's their fault. If they can't fit in and can't turn up, well, so be it. Apart from that, I'm quite happy to have those two that have been mentioned on the committee.
Thank you. Look, can I just firstly start by saying, Councillor Stewart, thank you for your passion and enthusiasm in this area. You've certainly done a lot of work in this space, supported by the council as well and our staff. But I think personally, your leadership in this area, I would like to acknowledge that. I think the Working Party in general is one where I think in this space that we do need to show some leadership. So I'm very supportive of it. And in terms of extending it to, I note Mr. Cleary's words there, but I've been persuaded listening to the argument that an invitation to both the chair of the water zone and also the chair of Ngāi Hariri probably would add a lot of value. And if we are to make gains in this space, we need as broad a buy-in as possible. So I'm relaxed in this space, because we've shown that through the Water Zone Committee that it works with all parties coming together. So in this space, I'm going to support it on balance. I note the concerns that are raised, but that'll be, as Councillor Atkinson mentioned in his moving comments, that ultimately it's up to those particular individuals as to whether or not they wish to be here. So that's fine. In terms of funding, it was mentioned before, just like to mention that I had an email yesterday from the PGF fund, so I will send that to respective staff members so that we can look at opportunities in that space. Jared, you might want to just add it to the list. I understand there was Jared and Chris are putting together a list of all the various funds that there are to make sure that where we're connected, that we've got applications in and there's a process underway, because there's a lot of funds being announced at the moment. It's just making sure that we're on top of all those and getting our applications in. But no, on balance, I'm going to support this. Thank you.
I've just got a question on our working group vision on page 15. Now, I'm fully across this, and I just wonder, anyone who reads it for the first time, where we say to improve ecological and recreation networks along our district's waterways to create a healthy ecosystems and a community of guardians. That's excellent. Part and parcel of Arahati Te Awa is rehabilitation of the waterway. So I wondered, and is that clear to people reading that? Because this is a question, because I was going to suggest that would create healthy aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems and a community of guardians, just to make it clear to those who are reading it that in fact the waterway rehabilitation is part and parcel, in fact the fundamental step of going forward with this project. Now, just tell me whether you all knew that and everybody would understand that when they read it as written.
Look, that's easy enough to add as a slight change to the terms of reference. That's fine. Okay.
Just before we speak, could I just ask staff, because we haven't had staff comment on that proposal, could I just ask Jared if he sees that proposal, the amendment proposal, being workable under what we're trying to do?
Yes, that is workable. That's perfectly fine.
Okay, so now D5, are we still on, as written there, one elected member, appointee? with the automatic assumption that any member of this committee can attend if they chose to. Is that where we're up to? What?
Was notes. So it's as you described, Councillor Mellings, and then notes all members of the Land and Water Working Group involved. That is the motion that's currently on the table.
Okay, anyone want to speak to that? No? Okay, well, I'm quite happy to move A to H with those various. Oh, sorry, yes, it has, true. So I will put it. Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, declare it carried. Thank you. And we move on to item 6.2, which is the zone implementation program for 2021, and invite Sophie Allen to the table. In your hands, Sophie.
And kia ora koutou. Right, so this is the report for information with the purpose of outlining projects for the 2020-21 financial year. There have been some changes to the Zone Implementation Program addendum or zipper budget due to the COVID reevaluation of the annual plan. So the CapEx budget was cut from 100,000 to 50,000 for next year. And then the operational budget has a slight reduction of the stormwater education funds, went from 20,000 to 10,000. So not a huge change in the operational. All the other projects were retained. Just before I go into the projects for next year, we do have some delays as well from COVID particularly for our planting projects that were due to happen in autumn. Some were for community groups, for example, and what's happened post-COVID is that all the contractors that we would normally have carry out plantings are very busy trying to catch up, and because we didn't book contractors in for the community plantings, we'll probably will be looking at late carryover requests for those plantings. Yeah, so the CapEx projects, we have the biggest one there is the biodiversity and amenity projects that we started off this year in the South Brook at Townsend Fields and the Taranaki Stream Reserve in Waikuku. So we've had some good progress there with some plantings in the spring last year at South Brook, and we've also had a path put in. There's a photo in the report at the Taranaki Stream Reserve, which allows us, access was an issue there to be able to get through. There were some culverts put in as well to be able to get to the whole section of the reserve, and now plantings can carry out along the whole reserve. There's quite a significant planting plan for next year. We have tidal plantings in the Kaipoi River, which were meant to happen this summer actually, but due to a high demand of the wetland plants from an ECAN order, the nursery accidentally made a mistake and didn't have the stock to provide, and then obviously with COVID we've had to postpone until next summer. And we finally have, for the CapEx projects, inanga spawning habitat improvements in the Taranaki stream, Courtney and Macintosh drain. So those are continuing on. So we have had willow removal, pampas removal, so tree removal, which was shading the inanga grasses where they spawn. And we have a planting happening in June for the Courtney. So that can take place. Moving on to the OPEX projects for next year, we have a pilot looking at shading of drains to try and reduce the amount of maintenance. The clearing of the water weeds that will be, that was meant to commence this year, but it's probably going to be moved into, will be moved into next year and maybe the year after. We have the drainage review, which I believe came to the Land and Water Committee. So that is, the drainage review looked at how WDC carries out our drainage practices, and has been morphed into a drainage management plan that will go to Environment Canterbury to apply for our consent for maintenance in manaworks and waterways. A stormwater education program should hopefully it was intended to kick off this school year, but obviously due to COVID, that we're looking at starting that next school year, to be confirmed. We have a research project which we have negotiated with the University of Canterbury to look at, so it's a partial funding for a PhD into climate change and the effect on Indigenous biodiversity in waterways, with our district as one of the key modelling and sample sites. So looking at how fish will adapt to climate change and what we can do to try and accommodate that. Ecological survey support, so helping us to get the information we need to make good decisions. There's more fund for that next year. The question Councillor Barnett had about the nitrate study pilot, that will be repeated next year, with hopefully with the same wells, so that we can start looking at trend over time. And finally, there's a small amount next year for developing technical guidance for private wells. So this is a project that started this year. We have a draft in progress, and we are doing some mapping of manganese, iron, arsenic and nitrate for our district. That will be part of a brochure for people with private wells or looking at putting down a potential new well, that they can get information about what might be some things to watch out for. So happy to take questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question to, well, probably to Jared, is Macintosh's drain, given the ODP and given the changes that could come through the NEC and through the airspace, the direction in which we're going, Macintosh's drain and Feldwick drain could be affected by that. Yet we're looking at planting it up, depending on the scheme, the stormwater scheme that happens with and if any development down there. Is it wise to be spending some of this money on Macintosh's drain if indeed, and I mean, it is a bit of crystal ball gazing, but is it wise to be spending money on that, enhancing it if indeed it could be changed in the near future, near being, 10 years, 15 years, but yeah.
Ellie, are you more familiar with the specific detail of that? Yeah.
Macintosh drain. Do not compromise any future upgrade works we do there. So there's fencing work and planting we want to do there. So it will be integrated with, potential future upgrades that might come into play there.
Just speaking on that brochure that you referred to with the wells, will that be actively distributed, or will it be in a targeted way, or will it just be passively there for people to pick up for information? Because I think that would be really good for well holders to have in front of them, because they often don't think about testing their wells.
Yes, so definitely active distribution. We are looking at both online, electronic formats, and a physical brochure. And we also plan to work with Environment Canterbury to expand to a brochure for different districts. The other district councils might try and copy our example, is the discussion we're having at the Canterbury Drinking Water Reference Group. So we might be leading the way on having something standard that is for all of Canterbury, that Environment Canterbury groundwater scientists work with us to develop, but then also have the individual local council components.
Just two questions, Sophie. The work that you're doing to look at testing of different elements in our water, is that being fed back into the district plan review to look at areas of zoning that might be appropriate given the state of private water wells?
So far, we haven't had any overlay discussions within the district plan. There are no particular zones that I would say are consistently above the MAV for drinking water standards. It's more, I think what the maps will show that we're getting developed is that it is patchy, and you do need to have, there's no consistency. There's a lot of variation even from one well to the next door well. So having that understanding, perhaps an overlay or an area where you say this is not where you should have a well is probably not the way to go. It's just having that the expectation that if you drill a well, there is a risk, and you should get it tested regularly to make sure that you know what's going on.
The second one is about the shading trials. We've had reports on that for many years of the trials, and it talks about a continuation. Will you be bringing back the results, because it's been ongoing for a long time? Are we going to see some more results about how that's been working?
Sorry, yeah, this is a slightly different bit of piece of work to the work that Greg Bennett has done in the past. I think or the work from Carrick's it might have been as well. Yeah, so this is a different section of different sites that we were looking at planting up. So I do believe Carrick's has already reported back on that shading, but maybe not directly to this council. So that's been an issue for me to rectify. So what I should probably use the word, I use the word trial, but actually it's a pilot where we are just expanding the number of areas that we are shading. Yeah, yeah. I used the wrong word. Yeah. Sorry, it is a proven concept. Yeah, exactly. I've called it a pilot. I think in the yeah, the wrong word choice. Yeah.
From A to D, a seconder, Councillor Atkinson. Thank you. Yes, a good program ahead. I think that hopefully we use all of our budget. I'll be urging that we do, in fact, carry out every single item on both our CapEx and OpEx. Yes, nothing further really to add. One question: the work that we are doing on the South Brook, have we done a macroinvertebrate index before we started doing all these sorts of works, so that we can actually measure whether the enhancements are having an effect?
No, WDC hasn't. I believe there might be some sampling information already I can look into. Yeah, it would be good to get something that is as up to date as possible before. Yeah, so it could be that we do undertake some sampling ourselves. Yeah.
I'd just like to just echo what you've just said about establishing a baseline. I think that would be a great step to take, and I don't think it would be that difficult, would it, really? And it would show a noticeable improvement, or if what we're doing isn't working, but certainly gives us something to put forward to show our efforts are getting somewhere. So yeah, I support that, absolutely. Yep, thank you.
All right, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, declare it carried. Thank you. And we move on to item 6.3, which is the Cam River Enhancement Fund and the Kaipoi River Rehabilitation Projects, an update, and welcome Janet Fraser to take us through all this. Thank you, Janet.
I'll start off. Yeah, so this report is also a report for information, mainly because you might remember at the 2nd of June council meeting, the terms of reference that were approved for this committee to take on the role of the Cam River Enhancement Fund Subcommittee and the Kaipoi River Rehabilitation Working Party. So this is a bit of a background of where what's happened with these projects and programs in the past, and where we're going in the future, and maybe just a bit of a heads up of some of the things that might be a few challenges or opportunities. So we have some photos in there, I believe. Oh no, yes we do. We have photos of the 2 heavy sediment traps in the report that were installed in the last few years. We had some bank stabilisation works at Northbrook. So this is for the Cam River Enhancement Fund. What we have had problems with those, we are waiting for that global consent for the maintenance and minor works and waterways to undertake the majority of the works. And it has been something that has been delayed, unfortunately, due to that need to have a drain management plan. So we're almost there, but we're still not sure quite when that consent will come through. We've also undertaken in the Kaiapoi River intertidal planting. There's a photo of what their planting looks like in the report, and dredging works, which Janet knows a lot more about than me, so there might be some questions. In the future, so next financial year, we are looking at sediment traps for the Cam River Enhancement Fund work, more planting, drainage wetlands, and what else? That's probably a good summary. So that is not just for next financial year, but ongoing. It'll probably take at least a couple of years for the program of works to be completed. And yeah, like I mentioned, it's consent dependent. For the Kaiapoi River rehabilitation projects, continuation of the dredging that's just about to start or has started on the Kaiapoi River. Planting both the terrestrial planting along the Kaiapoi River banks within the stock banks and more of that intertidal planting in the water. I noticed a small error in the table 1, just below 6.2.1. I had a fund of 20,000, a budget of 20,000 for planting and fencing. That was incorrect. It's actually 30,000. So the total of the table should be 10,000 more, which takes it more in line with a pretty much a match of how much money there was to allocate. So maybe that could be noted in the minutes for correction. And also at the time when I put this report together, I didn't know for sure whether the planting would be postponed. We were still trying to look for contractors. So this is the terrestrial planting for the Kaiapoi River. That will be a late carryover request as we haven't had any luck securing a contractor.
Sophie, Janet, there was some match funding from ECAN in this planting, the $10,000 a year, I think it was. Is that ongoing? And if so, will it transfer through to the other the program of works that in the last item that you had from ECAN? I mean, they're usually very generous when it comes to this sort of stuff. I just wondered with it.
So the Environment Canterbury, the park ranger had kick-started the terrestrial planting last year with the 5 planting nodes between the Cam River mouth down to the William Street Bridge. And they have had some planting that you'll see just upstream of the William Street Bridge on the northern bank, which where our proposed terrestrial planting was to augment and continue. And they have some planting nodes on the south bank downstream of the Cure Boating Club to the Courtney Stream confluence. So they've finished that last year. So this financial year, they had the willow control. So right through the main stem, and you'll see some gaps, I think, now in the willows downstream of the fishing corner in particular. So our terrestrial planting now is intended to help reduce wave lap erosion in those areas. So we haven't sought any further ECAN funding contribution because we're relying on them to continue to undertake the willow control through the main stem. And there would be an argument to push harder for ECAN to be more proactive in their maintenance of removing ivy and controlling willows with the ongoing saline intrusion. That might be a comment for Chris Brown with budget for maintenance inside the stock banks.
Sandra and I had a meeting last Friday, I think it was, with Fred from Environment Canterbury. He's the new river engineer there, and we talked about that willow control specifically, especially in that Kaiapoi main town centre area where the river is there. And he was reasonably sold on the idea of giving us more information around when he was going to be doing maintenance, how he was going to be doing maintenance, and working with us a bit more proactively than we've had in the past around what trees we're going to remove, when we're going to remove them, suggesting a walk around that we do on a yearly basis to actually identify the trees which need to be removed so that we can budget accordingly for any backfilling of terrestrial planting that we actually do. So that was a really successful meeting, which I think we're going to get some good information hopefully around budgets and actually forward program for willow control, which we haven't had in the past. It's been quite hard to get. Of course, linking that in with the presentation that Andrew Arps just did, if we suddenly have $7 million a year for the next 5 years of planting along the side of streams and rivers in our district, then I think funding is not going to be an issue for terrestrial plants along the Kaipoi River.
On page 40, where we talk about Kaipoi River rehabilitation, and we have the very sobering phrase about the river at the boat ramp testing as the worst freshwater site monitored in Canterbury during 1819, and only meeting recreational guidelines for 7% of the samples. What is our plan in conjunction with ECAN? Because it is a zipper recommendation that a plan for improving this waterway is accelerated through the zipper. So where are we with that, particularly in light that the William Street Bridge is designated now as a swimming hole, a swimming spot, and with that sort of water quality, where do we go from here?
Great question, Sandra, Madam Chair. So, yes, we do have, WDC have pigeon colony control measures planned for the 400 or so pigeons under William Street Bridge in August. So it's a problem with both the guano that's built up underneath the bridge, which is quite a mountain for our bridge contractors to remove, and also then to look at how to control the pigeons so they don't just move to somewhere nearby or change the structure of the bridge. They can't use the ledges there for nesting. So that's our we do know from Environment Canterbury work, fecal source tracking work, that the source of the E. coli in the river is quite highly avian. We don't know which particular species, but we can look at the pigeons to start with, and then obviously there's Canada geese. It's probably another highly likely culprit. We haven't had any discussions about anything further for bird control yet.
Yes, it is an excellent move to have both these river projects now within the agenda of the Land and Water Committee, and I'm really keen that the work continues. The profile needs to be raised of the work that's being done, and hopefully this will happen. Because essentially this is a couple of projects under the wider Arahata Tiawa sort of framework. So yeah, very keen that we continue with the impetus that we have here and involve our partner ECAN and Runanga. I was, as Chris has already indicated, really pleased to have the meeting with Fred Brooks, and he's undertaken from memory to have a program about what ECAN is actually doing in the Kaipoi as far as willow control. They're out there at the moment doing poisoning that ivy, and talking about what planting program they have and how we can work in with them. So that was very productive, and very keen to keep that contact. And if in fact it doesn't as far as the Kaiapoi, and we didn't get up the cam, but that does follow. We keep the liaison and the encouragement of having them be more, not only do the work but also talk about it to the community so everybody understands what's going on. And Fred was really good in that he took on board that the type of maintenance they do for way up in the back blocks is not appropriate for a stretch of urban waterway like the Kaiapoi and the Cam too. So that was very productive. So happy to, as I said, endorse this program. And Councillor Blackie. All right, any other comments? Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, look, just to reiterate that it's important, I think, that this committee, with the transfer of what we're doing now, one of the main aims of the Rehabilitation Committee from the start was to remind ECAN at every available opportunity that the stretch of water that runs through a town is very different to any other stretch of water that they have in Canterbury and that they are responsible for. And unfortunately, gets missed by many people within ECAN that there is, 12, 13,000 people that live on the shores of that river. And it's important that with the transfer of this, that the Land and Water Committee keep that in front of ECAN and keep reminding them that it is not just a place of normal river where all they do is control willow and put riverbanks. It is somewhere where people live, and they need to be reminded of that often.
It's a memo for information on the essential freshwater package. I didn't know, Jeff, did you want to come and talk to it, or? Well. So I wondered whether we just. Yes. Okay, in your hands.
The NPS and the NES for freshwater management were put out for public consultation during 2019. There were 17,500 submissions on the essential freshwater package, and the government, or the MFE, and the Minister for the Environment referred the submissions to an independent assessment panel chaired by former Environment Court Judge David Shepherd. And David Shepherd's report has been submitted now to government, and there's still decisions haven't been made. So there's a little bit of smoke and mirrors going on in terms of the way that MFE are dealing with this, because they've got a publication called Decisions on the National Direction for Freshwater. Well, the decisions haven't been made yet. So all that's happened is that Judge Shepherd has given his independent assessment panel report back to the Minister, and the Minister is not due to make a decision on the recommendations from the independent assessment panel until July. So it's sort of like decisions when you're not having decisions. And there's been a lot in the press about, these great announcements and all these sorts of things, but we still haven't seen the colour of the money in terms of what parts of the independent assessment panel's reports are going to be incorporated into the NPS for freshwater management and the NES for freshwater. So that's at least a month away.
Item 8 is questions. I haven't any of those. Haven't any urgent general business. There's nothing in committee. Our next meeting is August the 13th. Here in person we are. So thank you very much for your attendance, and I declare this meeting closed at 10:46 a.m.